So you get told you're not going to make it to the Olympics because you're bad at sprinting. What did you
Right.
do? Because you made it to the Olympics.
I told the guy that's what they told Tom Brady, and he looked back at me and he said, "You're no Tom Brady." And at that point, I was like, well, goddamn.
AJ Edelman, welcome to the podcast.
It is a pleasure to be here.
I'm so glad that we were able to get you on. Sliding into the DMs works occasionally.
I mean, if it nailed me this goodness, I am all for it.
Did you catch my pun? Actually, I just realized it now. Sliding?
I did catch the pun.
You're our first athlete on the podcast. How does that honor compare to being an Olympian?
I feel like athletes would love this kind of stuff. It's a very, well, what you have is awesome. But I'm very honored to be the first athlete on the podcast to 120 more.
You're welcome. That's funny. If anyone who wasn't Jewish, they didn't get that. It's all right. Yeah. Niche humor. We love it. So I have read your Wikipedia page. Yes, he has a Wikipedia page. And so does your dad. Why don't you give your elevator pitch for the people listening? Who are you? What's your childhood trauma like? Let's get into it.
I'm an Israeli sliding sport athlete, as you mentioned. Sliding sports are the umbrella term for bobsled, skeleton, and luge. Bobsled almost everyone knows about because of the movie Cool Runnings. Skeleton is a head-first version of luge, and luge people have just seen at one point people dressed up in spandex sliding down a mountain. So it's that is what I've been doing for the last 9 years. I represent Israel very proudly. I would only ever represent Israel. I represented them in the 2018 Olympics. My bobsled team hit the Olympic standard last year, but missed out by one spot because there's a strict quota on the amount of nations that can send a single sled, of which we were number 8 of 7. And then currently I still run and captain and pilot the bobsled team in its current iteration. And we have 3 years to go until the next Olympic Games, which we intend to be at in
Woo.
Yes.
And we'll get into that. You're also a Forbes 30 under 30, aren't
you? That is true. Though I have to caution people, it's not nearly as fun as you might think. Like, it's just a list. It's not really a thing. Like, there's no secret little WhatsApp groups or something.
You're like, compared to being an Olympian, who cares about Forbes?
Well, no, it's compared to being anything. Like, someone just puts you on a list. Like, put yourself on a list. Call it 30 under 30. Now you're 30 under 30.
I'm in Lexie's 30 under 30. You can be in Lexie's 30 under 30 too.
I would love to be in Lexie's 30 under 30.
Are you under 30?
No, I just hit 30.
You can make a guest appearance.
I identify
Special honor.
I identify as 30.
All right, let's take it back before we get to the fun Olympian stuff. How does a kid, usually kids growing up are aiming to be in the NBA or something like that. When did you dash those dreams of either becoming a football player or a basketball player and want to get into sliding sports?
When did I knife those dreams? Just stick them for good. Really, what it was after my senior season at school, I was playing hockey at MIT, and I was offered a chance to play for the Israeli hockey team.
So you started in hockey?
I did. I played hockey since I was 3 years old.
And I'm assuming ice hockey.
Ice hockey, yeah. A lot of my friends in school, whenever I mentioned hockey, they all thought it was field hockey. I know that it's very, very popular in some parts of the world. Growing up in Boston, men playing field hockey was just not really a thing. I did play hockey through university, and the Israeli hockey team came a-calling, and they said, why don't you join our team? We'd love to have you. And I thought at the time, if I'm going to continue to push the boundaries of what I think is possible for myself in sport, playing hockey for Israel is really not what I consider to be a top priority. The marginal benefit of me joining the Israeli hockey team is just not that great. But I can have a larger impact in competing in other sports if I can use that as a platform to potentially start a foundation to get funds and coaching and resources to underrepresented or Jewish communities that typically don't invest in sport and would allow children to pursue their athletic dreams in the future. And so that's how I got started on the road to Olympic sport.
So going back, you are from Boston.
Brookline. Brookline is right next to Boston. It's where all the Jews used to live. Now the Jews live in Newton. And I know if people hear this out of context, they're going to be like, why is he calling out the Jews? I'm Jewish. I'm Jewish. It'd be weird if I was like, it's where all the Jews are. But yeah.
I stay out of that area. Okay, so you are a child of 2 parents who are really awesome. We'll get into them. And also 3 siblings. Where do you fall in the ranking of your siblings? I mean, not in value, as in birth order.
I'm the middle child. And so I think there's a lot of, historically, whenever I've come across people who are also middle children, they seem to think, or they seem to want to classify me as like a middle child. I don't really know what that means. We have a very atypical family.
Middle children, they have a certain energy. But you're not giving middle child.
What is middle child energy? I need to know.
I feel like middle child is like, I'm not the oldest, I'm not the youngest. So I wasn't the firstborn, the one with the most responsibility. And I'm also not the youngest who like got the most attention. So like the middle child kind of feels like Hufflepuff.
First of all, I don't understand why people don't like being in Hufflepuff. Like Hufflepuff sounds great. Sounds like Jigglypuff, which was a great little Pokemon when I was a kid.
I haven't heard that take before in defense of Hufflepuffs. But also, I'm not a middle child, so I can't speak to the experience of middle children. I want to just clarify. Were you like the athletic one? Were your siblings like the funny ones? What was life like?
I think my younger brother, Austin, was the most athletic of all of us. He's really talented, very genetically gifted. Austin did basketball. He played baseball. He played hockey. Austin is just spectacular at all of that. Alex is indeed, of course, funny. He is a comedian. I'm far funnier. He gets paid to do it, though. I just kind of stay on the sidelines and judge. Over the course of time, Austin, Alex, and myself all drastically shifted in our approaches to life, what our goals were. We're a very non-static family in general. And so there was a lot of shifting around in terms of identities and what we wanted for ourselves. In school was the first time that I really adopted more of like an identity of I was a hockey player. But prior to that and since then, my identity has just shifted constantly. Now I'd say I'm an Israeli athlete. I very much refrain from saying that my identity is tied into the Olympics because the Olympics are a byproduct of the work that you put in to accomplish what you want to accomplish for your country. Defining yourself by the metric of having competed at a games is very, it's almost insulting to your own efforts because those games represented, let's say, 2 weeks of a journey that's now spanned 9 years.
Yeah.
And the team and myself missed out on the past games. And so would my identity have shifted from a Olympian to a double Olympian? Like, no, it would have just been like, I'm still an Israeli athlete. I'm very proud to be an Israeli athlete. So our identities, I can't speak for Austin, I can't speak for Alex, but my identity has been constantly shifting throughout, my time of whatever my goal is. It kind of, my identity takes on my the shape of my goal.
Let's get into what your parents do and kind of what it was like growing up with them and what they taught you growing up.
I'd say number one thing I should always mention is they are supportive. So they were always heavily interested in seeing us pursue what we had wanted to pursue and then find the success through our efforts of pursuing those paths. So when it came to hockey, my father was an incredibly busy physician, runs a lab at MIT, is a professor, head of an institute. Like, the guy is very busy. And he was at every single one of my hockey games as a kid, every single one without fail.
Wow.
And it was incredible. He really is one of the most spectacular father figures that one could ever ask for. He was a pioneer on modernizing the stent, which is put in people's arteries to keep them open. I don't really know how to describe him other than the smartest dude you'd ever meet. Very, very humble. You would never know it if you just met him. He's incredible.
Those are the best kind of people.
He sets an example that we should all, all 3 of us boys, of us Edelman boys, should aspire to be. And then my mom is also a brilliant real estate attorney. She's one of the most honest human beings that I've met. And so she would never see the inside of a courtroom. I guess she's not a litigator. She helps people. They're the reason that all three of us boys have been able to strike out and to look for our own paths of what to pursue. I mean, I face no pressure from dad whatsoever to be in medicine. I face no pressure from mom to be in law.
I was going to say, none of you are in law or science, are you?
No. I mean, Austin is in tech. My younger brother is in tech. I was in tech for a while. My mom went to MIT for a master's. My dad went to MIT for undergraduate and a PhD. And then I went to MIT as an undergrad, and Austin went to MIT as an undergrad. So we're kind of like an MIT family.
So what are some of the lessons that you learned from your parents growing up?
I think it's very hard to put into specific modular lessons what I learned. I think almost everything that I have become by some form of osmosis has been taken from their positive lessons. So work ethic, trying to proudly represent who you are and what you do, striving to be the best that you can be if you're attempting something, not slacking and not doing it half, just a half measure. So it's very hard to say specifically, mom and dad taught me this, mom and dad taught me that. They taught me everything.
Let's get into the fun stuff of sliding sports. What is bobsledding and skeletoning?
So skeletoning, we call it sliding.
Is that not right?
So skeleton is a head-first version of bobsled. So imagine bobsled is like if you were to take a school bus and then chop off the top of the school bus. 7-foot-long school bus, room for 4 in it, right? And you hop in and you slide it down a mountain, driving it down an ice tunnel. That ice tunnel is like, it's basically a mile long. Takes 60
it's basically
seconds.
Sledding.
It is. It's tobogganing. But on ice. It is an ice track rather than a snow track. So it's not like skiing. It's almost as if you were to strap some ice hockey blades to the bottom of a lunch tray, and that would be skeleton. Skeleton is where you just have a board. The board goes from your knees to your shoulders, and you slide down. You slide down a mountain
on your stomach.
On your stomach, head first.
Wow. Okay.
The basic premise of it is that it's a race, right? You need to get to the bottom as quick as you can in the shortest amount of time. So everyone goes one after the other. You finish your run, the next person goes. At the end of 2 runs, they tally up the time, and the lowest combined time is the winner. And
they're different courses?
Every bobsled track in the world is built differently. It has a different length. It has different gradations, different kinds of curves, different speeds. So the bobsled track in Whistler, British Columbia, you can get to like 93, 94 miles an hour. While the bobsled track in, let's say, Lake Placid, you get up to 83, 84 miles an hour. So that difference is huge. And we feel that. I mean, the layperson would just be crushed by the G-forces. So we undergo 5 G-forces. G-forces are, if you're ever in a roller coaster and you feel all that pressure against you, or if you're in a car that takes a sharp turn and it pushes you against the that's a G-force. So G-forces accumulate to 5 in bobsled, up to 5. And that means if you weigh 100 pounds, you'll feel like 500 pounds. If you weigh 200 pounds, you'll feel like 1,000 pounds. So most people if you're just a layperson, you'd only feel the pressure and you wouldn't really be able to distinguish between 95 or 93 and 86, 87. But I can tell a difference between 91 and 90.
How do you prepare for that?
By doing it a lot and getting hurt a lot. You have a lot of off-ice training mentally, mental prep. So all the time I'll be going through mental mind runs, meaning preparing, what I might theoretically steer in the track. I'd go through it in my mind. But aside from that, nothing replaces experience, which is one of the things that makes it such an expensive sport. Bobsled is probably on average like $150,000 to $200,000 a season. And that's without top-notch coaching. So
you just had to pick.
It's awful. It's really put a damper in my dating life too. No one really wants to date someone who spends all of his income on doing this. I should have just stuck with hockey. It would have been so much better.
Well, too late now.
It is too late. Sunken cost fallacy. I've been doing it for 9 years. I can't stop.
What is your schedule like with training?
It's very seasonal. So from October through March, that's the time that we can technically be on ice. All the tracks in the world exist in the Northern Hemisphere. The most recent one was in Beijing. You have one in Sochi, Russia. You have 3 in North America, 4 in Germany, and then 1 in Austria, 1 in France, 1 in Norway. What that means is that for the April to October time period, you can't really do the sport. You can't slide. You can practice components of the sport. So we sprint a lot in the sport, which is why I was given a scouting report originally that said I would never make the Olympics. I was told that it would be impossible for me to ever make the games because I was a terrible sprinter. And so all we do for 5-6 months is sprint and lift. Sprint and lift, sprint and lift. For me, there's a lot more than just sprinting and lifting. All the logistics of the team come into play, recruiting, making sure our equipment's going to be up to code and par, finding a coach if I can afford it. Fundraising is a huge problem because I need to fundraise a lot of money. I'm very bad at fundraising, the worst. I don't think there's ever been a bobsledder who's worse at fundraising. It makes things difficult, but it's unfortunately part of the job. And so what that means is generally I hold down a full-time job, and I also hold down a second full-time job, which is the team. So the team usually takes about 8 hours plus. It is tough, but it is what it is. If you want to make something happen in your life, you have to go make it happen. Nothing just falls into your lap. So, usually nothing falls into your lap. I haven't heard of a real success story just falling into their lap.
Going back, you mentioned that you were first told there was no way you were going to make it to the Olympics.
Correct.
Let's walk back to your thought process when you first heard that and what you did after.
I wanted to tell the dude to F himself. It was... I was called into an office. I went to try the sport in 2014, March of 2014. I was sent to try the sport in Lake Placid. About 5-day long kind of assessment camp as to whether you're going to be anything in the sport or not. And after those 5 days, I was called into an office and I was told very, very matter-of-factly, like, this is not the sport for you. You'll never make the Olympics. Like, you should stop immediately. At the time, there was a whole lot of pain associated with that because it's kind of like being rejected by a girl who you know is wrong for you, right? There's still rejection. No. There's still rejection. It still stings. You don't want to be rejected. Like, I don't know if anyone's listening on the podcast, but I feel like we've all had moments where, like, we know someone's not right for us, even if it was like after a first date, but the other person's like, we should stop, we should not go forward. And then you're like, oh man, why did they want me? Right. So it was kind of like that.
Rejection sucks no matter who's rejecting you or what's rejecting you.
That is correct.
I feel like it's a similar thing with college.
Yeah,
school's rejected you and it sucks. And then you realize, oh, wait, I love the school that I was at.
I feel like these past 4 years, the most significant times in my life have been forming the bonds with my boys. I call them my boys. They're the ones who sit in the back of the sled with me. People who push the sled are the brakemen and the pushers.
Okay.
So there's 2 disciplines in the sport, a 2-man discipline and a 4-man discipline. In 2-man, it's just me and someone pushing the sled. They jump in the back and they pull the brakes at the end. In 4-man, it's me driving the sled with 3 guys in the back who push it and then they jump in one after the other. Over the course of the past few years, 7 or 8 different push athletes have joined the team at various points in time. And all of them are my brothers, and we've had some very intimate shared experiences, scary, near-death experiences. Like, bobsled is a very dangerous sport. You develop a very close camaraderie and brotherhood.
So you get told you're not going to make it to the Olympics because you're bad at sprinting. What did you do? Because you made it to the Olympics.
I told the guy that's what they told Tom Brady, and he looked back at me and he said, "You're no Tom Brady." And at that point, I was like, "Well, goddamn." Yeah, he's like, "You suck, man." Like, I was like, "All right, well then this is gonna happen."
So is this where we insert like the training Rocky montage of you like sprinting up mountains? And
if we ever get a documentary, it would be, I think, quite the story to tell. Over the next 4 years, I watched 10 to 12 hours of YouTube video per day. Slept in cars, couch surfed like the whole globe that I possibly could, and I thought if I need 10,000 hours to get to top tier proficiency, the only way to do that is doing like 10 to 12 hours a day or more, like 14 hours a day, something like that for 4 years. How are you going to do that when you can only slide on ice for 60 seconds at a time, 3 or 4 times a day? The maximum people do in skeleton is like 3 runs for their health. I ended up doing on average 8 runs a day. And then I would go home and watch this 10 hours of video. And I was relentless. I was fanatical about getting Israel to those games. Something that I feel almost sad that I don't have that kind of same experience anymore. As you grow up, you mature and realize that you shouldn't, it dominates your life to having an extent. I couldn't hold a job and do that. I couldn't go to school and do that. But that was some sort of fanatical run that culminated in success. Thankfully, that's how it happened. Like, I left the guy's office and I swore to myself, I was like, I will not give up until Israel has this success. And that's, thankfully it worked out.
What is it like going down the slope?
Man, that's an interesting question. Everyone always asks, like, what is it like? I mean, skeleton I hated. I mean, I have to say I hated skeleton. I disliked the sport immensely. It was extremely painful and I went through a lot of pain. I also slid what was
like
called
going down. It's painful.
Very
going
much.
Head first.
I was
down the mountain.
I was hitting tons of walls. I couldn't keep my head up under the forces, so my head was dragging on the ice. It was like constantly being hit in the head by a boxer. I always wanted to do bobsled. Bobsled was my baby.
That's one where you're sitting, and
that's one where you're sitting, and you drive it with your hands. I was told that finding a second person to do bobsled with me would be the biggest challenge. And so I think I had realized that if I could self-propel a journey, I could have closure if it didn't work, right? I failed. It's very hard to find people who also want to give up a lot of their time and life and income and relationships to go and live in minus 20 degree weather, where they're used to basically just being in the sun all the time. I mean, that's really tough. And so I had known at the time that finding a second person or finding a brakeman would be impossible, especially when Israel had never yet qualified for a games in sliding sport. So you're going and selling them your dream, right? But people can't change their lives based on your dream. They also have to dream it as well.
What was your favorite run that you've done? And then what was the worst or scariest run that you've done?
We did extremely well about a month ago in Lake Placid. We beat 4 German sleds, including a former World Championships medalist. That run in bobsled, that is probably the best 2 runs that I have taken in a bobsled. The worst one or the scariest one that I've ever taken, we had some really, really painful, awful crashes in Whistler, British Columbia at 93, 94 miles an hour, sliding on our heads at that point because the sled flipped over.
Oh my gosh.
It was very, very dangerous. My fear in a bob is never for my safety. My fear is for the guys in back, because for better or worse, I kind of always, it's my risk. I'm driving it. They're not doing anything other than providing the push to the sled and then jumping in. The moment they're in the sled, their job is done, except to keep in a low aerodynamic profile, their head between their legs, things like that. Now it's my job to get them to safety. Every time I felt fear in bob has exclusively been for my boys, right? Like, I don't want to crash them. I don't want to screw them. I don't want to concuss them. So there were some dangerous calls last year in the Olympic season where we flipped over at 90 plus miles an hour in these very tight turns, and the whole time I'm thinking, like, my head's getting bashed around, but the whole time thing is, if I'm getting bashed around, I really hope they're not getting bashed around. So that was usually tough. Back in skeleton, I remember one spectacular one also in Lake Placid in 2017. Lake Placid's funny. I started my journey there. I was told I was terrible there. I didn't visit there for another 3 or 4 years. I had my best run ever there in skeleton. Qualified for the Olympics on the final day there in 2018, and then had the best. It is just something about that place that speaks to my sliding spirit.
So when you have a crash like that, what's going through your mind afterward?
The number one thing for me is, how are my boys?
What's the age range of your team?
21 to 28, and I'm 32.
Got it.
The second thing that goes through the mind is I need to go again. I do not want to end the day on a crash, because it can institute a mental block for which you ruminate on the crash. You spend way too much time thinking about the crash, and then you come back the next time with that having been the visualization of what has occurred for the longest period of time. Only probably 1 or 2 occasions in which I've ended the day on a crash, and that is when I was fearful for the sliding ability of the sled, for the safety of the equipment itself. A crash is very, very tough, because at 90 miles an hour, you've now just started smashing walls, right? Like it's really bad for the sled to be in a crash.
Have you had any injuries?
Me? Oh, tons. Yeah. I broke my nose like 7 or 8 times. I'm getting it.
My God.
I'm getting it fixed for good on June 2nd of this year.
We should wait until that. Just kidding.
I know. It'll be small, I guess.
Any other injuries besides the 7 broken noses?
All of my left side ribs, essentially. I was from skeleton. Almost all the injuries I have are from skeleton.
Jeez. I'm glad skeleton's not in the picture anymore.
I am too.
The next Olympics is in 2026. What is it like when you train for so long just to do a few runs? And particularly the Olympics, because it's every 4 years. So you do all this training and the day finally comes. What is the pressure like in that moment?
No one's going to even know whether you're doing well or not in the moment. It's very difficult as a layperson to know whether you succeeded in doing what you want in skeleton. Not many people would see even how you're driving a skeleton sled. It's done by movements of, minuscule movements of your neck, shoulders, knees, and toes. The driving force, I think, for me was I was sent here with the honor. The country bestowed upon me this honor that I'll never be able to fully pay them back for, right? Like there's nothing that I can do that would give them back what they have given me. And so it's my responsibility to do as best as I can to make sure that the performance is worthy of them. And then forever after, it's a responsibility to act in a way befitting of that, of how your country allowed you to represent it. And then to impart lessons from that journey to others, which is why doing podcasts, talking to kids, things like that is so close to heart. Because otherwise, the Olympics are a very selfish endeavor, right? They're purely personal if you don't use them as a force for good. I was bullied very, very heavily when I was in school. When I was between ages 10 to 12, it really changed my life forever. Who I was before bullying and who I was after that period were 2 completely different human beings. There was just so much that occurred as a result of that bullying that it became a very personal mission to talk to kids about it when I grew up and about how I was motivated by it, or the positive and negative repercussions for me. Because there were some positive, I became more independent. I had to force myself to succeed.
What was it like being that age, going through something so horrible?
I didn't really know how to deal with it. I tried to hide it from my parents because I didn't want them to think that they had, that they were like missing, something, so to speak.
What was your refuge during those years? If you couldn't go to your parents, did you go to your siblings or teachers or some other form of escapism?
I withdrew into myself. Trying to invent things became yet another one. So just creativity, but in the form of just self-contained.
If you feel comfortable sharing, what was the shift between that age range, and was it a school? Like you went to a different school, or just new year, new kids coming in? What was the cause of such
That's a good catch. I did go to a new school. I transferred schools, and I was the most religious person by far at the new school. So talking about it is really important, I think, for the overall conversation, because generally things that are not talked about are viewed as something to feel shame for. And I think kids especially really internalize rejection and bullying. It's something about, it's a form of rejection, right? Bullying is an extreme form of rejection in its usual circumstance. And children find rejection to be some sort of reflection on themselves rather than the truth, which is a reflection on those who are doing the bullying. So the more we talk about it, the more we kind of normalize the conversation about the fact that it exists and that it's unfortunately something that, needs to be treated at some point. The healthier the community gets and the more we can talk about it openly in the future.
How do you view those kids who bullied you now?
It's even hard to remember most of them. It was so long. I mean, now it's been 20.
But in the moment, do you feel like you would ever have forgotten their faces or names?
No. I mean, everything is so fatalistic when you're young. Right?
Yeah.
The world is ending and this is the worst. And so, but the reality is that I just don't know who they are anymore for the most part.
Yeah. And if you did, you could send them your picture at the Olympics.
One of the key things that I have taken from my own personal journey is that everyone evolves and everyone changes.
Yeah.
People can become. I mean, who I was at 10 and who I was at 12 or 13 were not the same human being, right? It's like the one at 10 was knifed and gone. And so people have life altering and life changing episodes, and they drastically change. I wouldn't even really hold it against people if I had met them. If I met them first. I do remember there was one episode where we call this kid G, and at one point I got really fed up with him, so I kind of just punched him in the mouth. And he started, crying, telling me not to tell a teacher about it because he was bleeding. I was like, I never was violent. I was never physical with anyone except for that incident. I was like really, really upset. And he was crying. He's like, don't tell the teacher. I was like, why not? I just hurt you, bro.
Yeah.
And he said, because I think he had mentioned his parents were getting divorced or something like that. Like there was not so much good stuff going on at home. And at that point I was like, I feel so sorry for this kid, right? Like this is a kid who was like tormenting me about 5 minutes ago. But I mean, I actually will never forget that, right? Because it actually produced a profound shock in me to realize that there's a whole side of why people are treating you the way they are.
What are the words of wisdom or experiences that you share with kids, and speak more on how you spread the word about the importance of not bullying?
So I think I spent less time on the importance of not bullying, because if someone's going to bully,
feels pretty silly to say. Do you know that you shouldn't bully?
Right. It's just either misplaced anger or some sort of things. What I try to reach is the kids who are being bullied, right? Because they're the ones who need the support. When I'm addressing a group of people, I don't want to specifically call anyone out. I generally just say, hey, given your age range, there's a greater than 80% chance that a few of you have been bullied in this room, to a point where you've experienced some mental health, difficulties as well. I just want you to know that it's never going to be a reflection on you being bullied. Bullying is someone trying to pull you down with a rope. They've attached a rope to you and they're trying to pull themselves up. And so it's not a reflection on anything except for your worth, right? Your worth is greater than theirs in their eyes. And so just trying to shift the paradigm or shift the dynamic of how they view bullying from something that is a rejection of them to something that is actually probably based more than anything in some sort of envy
What are some of the reactions that have affected you from kids you've spoken to?
It's very touching, but it all, at the same time makes me feel sad sometimes, because there are for every child that I'm reaching, there's 100,000 children I'm not. Right. Yeah. And so that is, there are other little AJs out there that are having their lives actively changed at the moment by kids who are bullying them.
What is the work that you did after the intense years of bullying that you experienced in order to get to the place you are now of grace and some self-esteem and confidence?
Actually, I think a lot of it was continual rejection in various forms that forces introspection. After every single period of time for which there's failure or rejection or bullying of any sort, there is a period of introspection and more lessons are learned. So it wasn't an immediate process. I didn't realize this until way later. I didn't realize it, let's say, at age 13. I was still drastically changed, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. It's only really in the last few years that I've been able to internalize a lot of these lessons and carry them forward. I feel sad that they came almost so late in life, where they really could have helped at age 15, 16, 17, etc. But at the same time, it also contributed to who I am and that I made the games, right? Like that self-compulsion is what allowed me to get to the games. That ability to be on my own in the wilderness without any support there is allowed me to be who I am today. So I'm not entirely sad about it.
For other kids going through what you went through and dealing with the depression or anxiety or social anxiety, introversion, what words of advice do you have for them on how to get out on the other side?
I think therapy is really helpful. I think it's really hard to find a good therapist. I think it's incredibly difficult to find someone who resonates with you. And Lord knows I'm still searching. There have been only once or twice in the past I found the right person, but traveling for my sport makes it nigh impossible to continue with that sort of thing. So therapy is important. Talking to your trusted loved ones, your parents, are important. I think children especially have a tendency to think that their parents don't get them. And I think in many respects, it can seem to be true. But just because your parents don't understand your exact situation does not mean that their breadth of knowledge and the lessons that they've learned, including from the time period that they were in that you're currently in, don't apply uniquely to your situation. Right. So in some sense, I wish I had spoken to my parents about my mental health struggles at age 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. My parents didn't figure out about my mental health struggles until age 27 or so.
Wow.
Until after my first games, when I spiraled after the game. After the games, I retired. There was a very anti-Semitic incident that took place at the Olympics. I spiraled out of control a little bit. It sent me into very, very deep depression. And that's when I told my parents about the mental health struggles that I was facing. It took a very long time. Hiding that for years took a lot of energy. I think that would be the number one advice is talk, right? And they can help. They can help find therapists. They can help find resources for you that as a kid, you just don't have access to.
The last thing I wanted to touch on is Jewish representation in sports, because we kind of have a self-fulfilling prophecy in our communities of Jews can't do sports. Any Jewish comedian loves to mention that. It's a hilarious trope we have, but it does come to some negative effect that kids growing up in Jewish communities might not think that they actually can have a future in this.
It's actually terrible how we have reinforced this awful narrative of Jews not doing sports. It has severely limited the investment that Jews place in sport, and through that continues to perpetuate the cycle. Because if there's no investment in development of Jewish athletes, then kids don't have the resources to excel and become good Jewish athletes. There's no Jewish gene that makes you garbage at sport. It's just the fact that no one's prioritized it. It would be the same as if you went to anyone of any race, and we're like, well, you're just bad at books.
Yeah.
Right? And they'd be like, what? Oh, your brain's just bad at it. Your body's not built for it. Now, true, Jews are maybe not born to be the best 100-meter sprinters. But then again, so is 99% of the world's populace.
Yeah.
But we are very good at excelling and at things that we set our mind to.
Mm-hmm.
And it is crazy to me how this self-fulfilling prophecy goes, especially considering the heavy overrepresentation we have in sports management.
Yeah, that's really important to know.
A few years ago, I was trying to desperately save the team. Someone who had said they were going to fund the team was not able to fund the team, and so I was in the hole by a significant amount. And I needed some funds to basically have the team continue to exist. I called up maybe 25 sports team owners, major sports team owners, NBA owners, NFL owners, NHL, MLB, people who are legit bona fide multi-billionaires. I said, hey, this is a tax-deductible donation for a team that is very good. It's very talented, but I need to save it, because if we save it, we have an incredibly good shot at the Olympic Games. And it could create a real generational shift in what we perceive to be possible for Israelis and Arabs, to accomplish, because the team is half Arab. At the time, it was 75% Arab. I was the only Jew on the team. Wow. Each and every one of them said no. Right? Not just no, but like, hey, I don't even need like an $1,000 tax deduction. Like, it was just laughing, screaming, no, like, don't call me again. This is like, it's not, I mean, most often I just heard it's not in our giving profile. That to me doesn't make sense, right? You're a Jewish sports team owner. You have a responsibility, in the same way that I have a responsibility as a Jewish Olympian, to raise up other Jewish athletes and to tell them that what they're doing is possible and to try to support them. Now, every donation I get, a percentage of that goes to a fund to give a grant to a deserving Jewish athlete. There's no reason why that should be a higher priority for me than someone who owns an NFL team. So at the time, I called up a family who owned an NFL team. They're Jewish, and I said, I had this whole talk, and it was actually the wife. Right, the wife had picked up the phone, and she was like, "Yeah, this is not even close to what we care about," Mm. And then I said, but we can, we'll probably make the Olympics, right? Like, it's relatively nothing. Right? And she's like, yeah, good luck with that. And she started laughing, and she just hung up the phone. I mean, it hurts because someone has just told me that what I find to be an incredibly valid and noble endeavor is worthless. How can the goal of increasing Jewish participation in sport be so low on a priority list that you belittle it, right? Not that you say like, hey, we just have a lot of other things that we need to take care of, but to actively belittle it. It's not a joke. Jews competing in sports are not a joke. Jews competing in sports are good, and it's noble, and it's holy, and it's great, right? Sports are a means of self-development, self-expression, of becoming an ambassador of yourself and your people and your country.
Give me a quick, what does the future hold? Anything that you want to share with our audience about what are plans for AJ Edelman and sliding sports?
The plans are Israel's got to get to this Olympics. Israel has to qualify for the games in 2026 in bobsled, and we will. I swear it, we will, if we find the funds. Otherwise, I just don't know what else the future holds. I eventually have to start a family, eventually have to find a wife, a partner, something like that. Hopefully one that is supportive this time around. But yeah, I mean, that's what the future holds, I guess.
On that note, let's raise our glass.
Raise our so goods.
I'm drinking our acai of relief smoothie. AJ is drinking
the any greens necessary.
So AJ, to send us on our way, what words of wisdom would you like to impart on our listeners? We'll do a little Chaim.
So I'd say the words of wisdom are honestly any time that you have a fuel, even if it's negative energy, that energy can be redirected towards more positive things and towards self-improvement. It's really hard, but it can be done. And so try it. Like, really try your best.
I love that. AJ, thank you so much for your time. This was really great and informative.
My pleasure.
L'chaim.
L'chaim.
Shabbat shalom.
Thank you. I should make a Kiddush on this.